All right. Good afternoon, everybody. There's a couple of people in here, so hopefully this is where you're actually meaning to be. Um, my name is Jeremy. I am your professor. If you want to join the live chat, then you can actually ask questions and interact. So this is for the CSCI 100, Computers in Our Society, and this will be the first video for the, first week after the extended spring break, which hopefully all of you had a good, safe spring break and you're staying home, not getting sick, and hopefully not um, not coming in contact with anybody that may be getting sick, but try to stay safe out there and let me know if there's anything that you need help with on your classes or your homework. So this week we are going to be talking about copyright and patents. So copyrights, a really big important thing um, uh, in the US law and actually law around the world. It's how a creator can protect their intellectual work that they ended up creating. So, in the US Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 states to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. The key parts of this is limited times. A copyright is not a permanent thing. Once you are assigned a copyright, you own that for a short length of time. After that time is over, well, it's a question as to what actually happens with it. And we'll see today various methods that copyrights can be transferred to other individuals or corporations, as well as what happens after it completely expires. Um, Throughout this entire stream, if you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to write it into the chat. I do have it up on my other monitor, so I can actually monitor that, see what it is, and answer the questions. I think there's a delay. I'm not sure how long of a delay there is. So if you ask something and it takes me a minute to get to it, don't worry. I'm sure I'll see it. I don't actually see anybody in the chat right now. So if you are there, please write something so I can actually tell that this is all working and you can actually hear me. That's the other key thing. I'm not sure if audio is actually working, which I believe it is, but I'm not 100% certain. So let me know if there's any problems. Definitely let me know. So, um, promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So, copyright clause. Back in August 18th, 1787, the Constitutional Convention proposed the intellectual property rights. So before this, there there was probably some copyright, but not really anything which was standardized. Before 1787, well, the U.S. was still being formed. They were still subject under England. Oh, I do see responses there. So um, it was still under England rule, and so it would have had to follow whatever England's copyright laws were. After the American Revolution, they set up uh, their own constitution and everything, and they proposed intellectual property rights. So Charles Pinckney proposed to secure to authors exclusive rights for a limited time. That was his contribution to it. And then James Madison added on to it, and he proposed to secure literary authors their copyrights for a limited time, or in the alternative, to encourage by proper media or proper means and provisions the advancement of useful knowledge and discoveries. So in September 17th, 1787, the Constitutional Convention was unanimously agreed to the proposed language without debate. And this language was incorporated into the Constitution for what we now know. So what is a copyright? A copyright is a legal right that grants the creator of an original work exclusive rights to determine whether and under what conditions this original work may be used by others. It is something that if I create something, I can determine who can use it and how they can use it, and whether or not I want a company to use it, or if I only want individuals to use it, or something along those lines. Um, if I'm working at a business and I create something while working at the business and I'm getting paid at the business, that company owns that copyright. Whatever I create on company time is owned by the company. And a number of individuals have gotten into troubles with this because they create something on company time, they go to another business, they figure that they were the ones that created it, they own the copyright, they can take that work to another business, use it for whatever it is, and the first company sues them for sometimes millions of dollars for intellectual copyright theft, and typically the company will win because they own the copyright. Um, like I had mentioned earlier a little bit, copyright is different around the world. Every country has slightly different copyright laws. There's no one standardized length of time. We're primarily going to focus on US copyright just because, well, we live in the US, but every country has varying degrees of what is actually protected under copyright. And copyrights also are not transferable between countries. So if you own a copyright in the US, that copyright isn't necessarily valid in, say, Germany. Now, there's certain agreements between countries that they will enforce certain copyright laws, and they will abide to the host country's copyright laws, but not all countries do, and you don't have to do that if you're that country. It's not to say that copyright violations is a good thing, it's just not always enforced across the world in a standardized method. So here is a list of countries with copyright lengths. So if we look down here, well, actually, I'll just go to this upper image. All right, so this is a overall viewpoint of what different copyright life or length of terms is in the world. So as we can see, color-coded wise, the US copyright is valid for life plus 70 years. And I'll get to what all of that means, but life plus 70 years. Most of Europe is about the same. Most of Russia, well, Russia is the same. Some countries have longer copyright terms. Mexico is life plus 100 years. Some have much shorter terms. I don't remember which country that is. That may be Sudan. Um, it's one of the northern African countries because Egypt is there. That's life plus 25 years, so much shorter. Um, but the general length of time seems to be about life plus 70 years, with ranges in between there. So the US follows that. The European Union, any country which is a part of the European Union, follows the same copyright length of time. So every country in the European Union, including the UK for right now until they finish their Brexit thing, with whenever that will actually happen, has to follow the same life plus 70 years. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so you will have a copyright notice, and a copyright notice will look something similar to this. Copyright might have a C and a circle, the year that the work was created or copyrighted, along with the creator's name, and all rights reserved, meaning I reserve all the rights to that work, not some other company. Um, if the work was created after 1989, copyright is implied. You don't have to include this copyright line there. I mean, it's not a bad thing to do, but you don't have to. Um, so anything created after 1989 doesn't need that. Anything created before 1989, again in the US, has to have that copyright line there. If you work in the federal government, everything that you create is public domain. And you may be asking what public domain is. Um, Public domain is a section of the copyright law which basically states that if this work is in the public domain, you are free to do whatever you want with it. And you may be thinking, well, it's copyrighted. I mean, somebody created it, they own the copyright to it. Why is public domain whatever they can do? Well, that just is what it is. A public domain is content which has no exclusive intellectual property rights applying to it. The rights may have expired. So if you remember from the image where the length of the copyright term was life plus 70 years, after the creator dies, 70 years later, that copyright expires. Whatever they created is public domain. The right may have been forfeited, may not have been enforced correctly. They may have waived the rights to enforce it, or the copyright may not be applicable. So if you work in the federal government, everything you create, well, everything the federal government creates is public domain. Now, they don't have to release it, but if they do release it, they are not allowed to apply a copyright to it to, say, charge companies to be able to use it. So that brings us to this guy. Um, Anybody know what his name is or seen this image before? And I'm pausing for a minute, but since there's a delay, I'm not going to wait the entire length of time, but I'll go ahead and tell you. So this is a guy by the name of Naruto. He is a monkey, Macau, I think, from Indonesia, I believe. Um, this is his picture. There was this photographer. Um, let me look up his name really quick, just so I don't butcher his name. Let's see. So there was this guy by the name of David Slater, a British nature photographer. Um, he traveled to, I believe it was Indonesia. Let me double check. Yep, he traveled to Indonesia to take photographs of critically endangered uh, Celebes crested macaws, Macaques. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. But anyway, so he went there to take pictures of these monkeys. And in the process, he set up all of his equipment on a tripod, expensive cameras and everything, left it up there. And this guy, he was very curious, came by, wanted to see what was going on, and actually took the remote trigger for the camera and took this selfie along with a couple of other selfies. And the photographer, David Slater, published the picture and claimed copyright for it because, well, he took the picture and made a little bit of money. Everything was good for a while until Wikimedia Commons. They are the organization which runs and controls Wikipedia. They published this image online. They claimed that it was in the public domain. The photographer claimed that he owned the copyright and it was not in public domain. Um, Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons, they argued that this image or this monkey cannot, or this is not a copyrightable image because it is a monkey. Um, let's see. So um, foundation stated copyright cannot vest in non-human authors, and when a work's copyright cannot vest in a human, it falls into the public domain, which means that the photographer doesn't actually own the monkey. The monkey owns himself. Since the monkey took the picture, the monkey owns the copyright. Since a monkey can't own a copyright, well, it's in public domain. So the lawsuit went back and forth, and eventually the courts agreed with Wikimedia Commons in stating that, yes, this does not have a copyright to it, and the photographer lost out. Well, after that happened, the group PETA, or the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, filed a lawsuit. They basically said that um, he is, or the monkey is a person and has to be assigned the copyright, and so the monkey should get all the money for it. Well, didn't go anywhere, and they ended up losing out on that. And it was determined that copyrights can only exist for a human. A human can only exist or can only own a copyright. It raises the interesting question of, well, the monkey couldn't take the picture without a human helping him. The human, in this case David Slater, owns a camera, owns a tripod, went to Indonesia. He's the sole reason that this picture exists, but the monkey just happened to press a button. So it's, I don't know if I entirely agree with the assessment that the monkey is the copyright and the photographer doesn't own the copyright, but I also don't know that the photographer should really own the copyright for something else. It's the same as if I go out and I take a picture of somebody, that person should own the copyright if they were the ones which hit the button on the camera. So it's kind of a legal gray area, and it doesn't really solve a lot of questions. But the general ruling is that monkeys cannot own a copyright, and since the monkey was the one that took the picture, the monkey owns the copyright to it. Therefore, there is no copyright. It exists in public domain. Unfortunately, the photographer told BBC News that he suffered financial loss as a result of the pictures being available on Wikimedia Commons. He put up his own money to travel to Indonesia. He owned his own equipment. He only made, it says he made £2,000 for that picture in the first year after it was taken, which I don't know what that is in US dollars. I think it's $2,000 to $3,000, somewhere around there. Um, but he's lost more money because he cannot claim the copyright on it. Unfortunately, he has lost a lot of money. He ended up, let's see, I think he um, worked as a dog walker after a while, but now he's actually sold his story to a magazine, and I think he's doing decently well now. So it's not a entirely bad outcome, but yeah, he felt that he should own the copyright to it, even though he unfortunately does not. So, what is in the public domain? So, anything created by a old classical composer like Beethoven, Mozart, anything created by them is public domain. The works of Shakespeare, those are all public domain. Many early silent films are all public domain. In fact, you can go on Wikipedia and do a search for silent films, and you can find full-length silent films there that you can watch. Um, some of the works were created before the relevant copyright laws. Others had their copyright term expire. So anything created by Beethoven, Shakespeare, those were created before any U.S. or European copyright laws, whereas some of the stuff like the silent films, those were created after the copyright laws, but whoever created them, it's passed or it has exceeded the copyright term. Cooking recipes, those are public domain. So if you create your own super secret macaroni and cheese, which incidentally is you take a bunch of macaroni, you boil it, you cook it up, then you take a bunch of cheese, a little bit of flour, milk, you blend that all together, then you mix it all together into a casserole dish, take some kielbasa sausage, chop it up, put it in there, add some cheese on top, cook it for about an hour. That's some macaroni and cheese, not any of this box craft stuff. But anyway, cookies and peas, those are public domain. Any computer software created before 1974 is public domain. Anything created after 1974 does have a copyright applied to it, but anything created before that is public domain. I don't know exactly what computer software you would actually want to use from before 1974, especially in this day and age, but there are some algorithms and stuff like that which are still useful. Um, some works are created, or some created works are explicitly dedicated to the public domain. So ImageJ is an image processing software written in Java. That was created by one of the federal government entities. I don't remember specifically which one. The CIA's World Factbook, that is public domain. Again, stuff created by the federal government, if it's released, is going to be public domain. And public domain is just that. You can do anything, anyone can do anything they want, anybody can take it, you can modify it, you can sell it, you can take a silent film and you can burn it onto a DVD and you can go sell it on the street corner, perfectly legal. People may pay you money for it. People probably won't pay you money for it, but they may pay you money for it. But anything which is in public domain, you are 100% free to do whatever you want with it. You can sell it, you can mod it, you can break it down into individual components to sell that, do whatever. So, the Copyright Act. Copyright Act of 1790 was the first implementation of copyright law. It allows creators to own their own work for 14 years and then extend it for another 14 years. So when the Copyright Act first came into play, people, when they would create something, it was basically 28 years and then it would become public domain. So they would have to constantly create new stuff and then apply a copyright to it in order to maintain any sort of copyright protections over it. And also the extension was not automatic. You had to apply to the Copyright Office to actually extend it the additional 14 years. In 1831, it was revised to 28 years with the 14-year extension, which brought it more in line with what Europe was doing at the time. 1909 was the next major update to the Copyright Act. It broadened the categories that were included, went to 28 years with a 28-year extension. You could do a total of 56 years. The last major revision was made in 1976, which extended it to the life of the creator plus 50 years, which 1976 kind of matches with the software created before 1974. Which included exclusive rights to the creator, fair use, and transferability. So, what is fair use? Oh, that's one of those later slides. Never mind, I had my slides out of order. So, going back to this, this is a chart of the length of the copyright. So you can see the red was the original 1790 Act, which was 14 years plus an additional 14 years. The 1831 Act, which extended it to 28 years. The 1909 Act, which extended it even more. The 62 and 74 Acts and the 1976 Acts. That one's just a small little footnote. And then the 1990 Act or 1998 Act, or also known as the Sonny Bono Act, which we'll talk about that uh, specifically a little bit later. But that is kind of the more recent copyright, but it's basically the same as the 1976 Act, only they extended copyrights. But you notice that as the years go on, copyright terms don't ever shrink. They always get longer. So what is protected by copyright? So if you own a copyright, you have the exclusive rights to reproduce the work in copies or phonorecords. You have the exclusive right to prepare derivative works based upon the work. So basically, you can create something from your original work. You have the right to distribute copies or phonorecords of the work to the public by sale or other transfer of ownership or by rental, lease, or lending. This is the actual US code text, which is why it references phonorecords and other terms which are not in common use anymore. In the case of literary, musical, dramatic, and choreographic works, pantomimes and motion pictures, and other audiovisual works, you have the exclusive right to perform the copyrighted works publicly. In the case of literary, musical, dramatic, and or choreographic works, pantomimes and pictorial, graphic, or sculptural works, including the individual images of a motion picture and other audiovisual work, to display the copyrighted work publicly, and in the case of sound recordings, to perform the copyrighted work publicly by means of a digital audio transmission. Um, so those are the rights which are protected by the copyright. So that brings us to fair use. So fair use is a part of the copyright law, which was added in the 1976 Act. It is a doctrine that permits limited use of copyrighted material without having to acquire permission. So the considerations, the purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. And I'm just going to talk about these really quickly after I mention all the considerations. The consideration is the nature of the copyright work or copyrighted work, the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole, and the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. So what does this mean? So public domain means that you can take a work which has a copyright or used to have a copyright and do literally whatever you want with it. Fair use allows you to take something which has a current active copyright and use it in a certain manner. So the first one, this is probably the most common exception. The purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. So I can take copyrighted work and I can use it in my classroom teaching. I can cite specific copyrighted works without actually having to get permission from the copyright owner because it is in an educational context. If I had a business and I wanted to use some copyrighted work, I couldn't do that. But if I'm teaching and I wanted to show part of a video in a classroom, I could do that. There's also the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole, which basically what that means is you can use part of a work or part of a copyrighted work, you just can't use the entire thing. And the part that you use, you have to have a kind of a reason to use it. Um, you can't just take a video and break it up into 10-minute chunks and declare it fair use. But you can take a video, play it behind you as you're talking about the video or as you're explaining various parts of the video or various things, much like somebody reviewing a video, and probably not the entire video, but um, snippets of the actual video. Same with gameplay. You can do the same thing. Also, the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. So this is where like parodies come into play. You can create something as a parody, but there's certain restrictions as to how you can actually use that song in a parody or in another song. So there's a number of fair use um, notable things. So Oracle Incorporated versus Google Incorporated. And again, if we were in class, I would actually ask and wait for people to respond or see who raises their hand, but I can't do that, unfortunately. So um, if you have not heard of Oracle, Oracle is a rather large company out there. They own a number of software programs. the biggest of which is Java. And they also own Oracle database and a bunch of other stuff. Some people like them, some people don't. It's for them to decide. Google is the owner of, well, Google and Gmail and, well, YouTube, which is what we're watching this on. Um, so anyway, Google also created in my opinion, the best mobile phones out there, or the best mobile phone operating system out there, Android, um, which is far superior to iPhones. But again, that's just my humble opinion. But anyway, so when Google was first developing Android, Apple had already created the first generation iPhone, and Google was trying to figure out how they were going to create Android. And so they went looking around and they saw Java. Well, Java was owned by Oracle, um, or Sun Oracle, somewhere around there. And Google to them and said, hey, actually, it was originally owned by Sun, but they said, hey, we want to create this new operating system. We want to base it off of Java. We need permissions for this. And Sun was like, sure, go ahead and do that. The Java engine was licensed, but there was APIs, or application programming interfaces, and that's a key point for it. An API is basically you write a program, and then if another program needs to access it, it will access it from um, specific functions and access specific portions of the program, but doesn't have to know the entire internal workings of the program. So, like for an example, if I wanted to write a calculator, and let's say I wanted to write a calculator where I was adding two numbers together, and I didn't know how to add two numbers together for some reason. But somebody else wrote a program which all you need to do is just call this API, give it two numbers, and it will spit back an addition. Well, I could go ahead and write my program and then use the other program and then just send my two numbers there, get back the number, and then use that. It's called an API, or an application programming interface. And it allows you to write software without actually having to write huge amounts of software which somebody else has already written. Well, anyway, Sun owned this, and Google, they started to write the Android operating system with it. Well, Sun started to see how popular it was becoming and decided to tell Google that they needed to pay licensing for this. Google claimed that it fell under fair use because they were just using the APIs that were provided to them. They were not actually using the original software. It's the same thing as if anybody else decided to write something in Java and wanted to use those APIs. They didn't have to pay Sun for it. Well, Oracle ended up buying Sun out, and so Oracle decided to sue Google for it. And a lawsuit went on for, I think it's still actually going on, but I think it's been going on for about 8 to 10 years. I At one point, Google owed Oracle several billions of dollars, and then at another point, Oracle owed Google some money, and then Google owed Oracle, and it went back and forth. And I don't really know exactly who owes what anymore, but um, the I think the main key from this is the judge ruled that the API is actually falls under fair use, and so Google doesn't actually have to get a copyright permission for that. It's still ongoing, and really, in the grand scheme of things, the winners and losers of all of this, well, the losers are, well, everybody, and the winners are, well, the lawyers. Um, so it's just it's an excuse for big companies to fight over bits of money and market share and everything else. But without the API, Android would not exist as we know it now. Google has since moved away from Java and has developed their own backend for it. and I don't remember specifically what it's called. It's either Dalvik or there's another one. But anyway, um, so they don't actually use the Java APIs anymore. But for a while, they were still using Java as the backend for Android. The other part of fair use, parodies. And I mean, I'm a nerd. You guys all know me. I am a huge fan of Weird Al. And if you've never heard of Weird Al before, you should go onto YouTube. He's uploaded a lot of his videos onto YouTube, including one of my favorites, White and Nerdy, or Amish Paradise, which is a parody of Gangster's Paradise. White and Nerdy is a parody of this is a song by Chameleonaire, Riding Dirty. But anyway, Weird Al, all the songs that he creates falls under fair use. He's using the original song or the original beat and everything else. Sometimes the exact original beat, but sometimes he changes it and uses uh, accordion and all sorts of other stuff. But he uses that, and then he creates new lyrics for it. And that all of his songs fall under fair use. Now, even though it falls under fair use, I don't believe he has been sued, but some artists have not wanted him to create songs or create parodies of their songs. And Weird Al, he is actually one of those who goes out and asks the artists ahead of time to say, hey, can I go ahead and do this? And most artists say absolutely. In fact, they're generally honored to have it happen. Some artists have not said that, and so that's why there's no parodies that Weird Al has created of Prince, because Prince is uh, the company which owns the copyright to his songs said that Weird Al cannot create parodies. Now, Weird Al still could. He'd fall completely under fair use to do it any way or if he wanted to, but he respects the artist and doesn't want to do that. But if you're creating a parody, you can create a parody of a song, a movie, a TV show, something like that, and fall under fair use perfectly fine. Reverse engineering. So you can take software or hardware, you can reverse engineer it or basically take it apart, see what all the components do, see how software works, all that sort of stuff. And that is completely legal to do. That falls under fair use. Now, I have a note here saying that it's legal under copyright law, but it is against most EULAs or end user license agreements. So hopefully you all know what an end user license agreement is. Those are when you go to install a program, the thing which pops up says, do you agree to terms, accept, or decline, or whatever, and you have to read through the entire 10-page long text, which is 90% legalese and nobody ever pays attention to. That basically is signing away your entire rights for sometimes everything. Sometimes the end user license agreement includes little tidbits in there where I think one of them was the first person who contacted the company and mentioned a specific section of it. This was for one specific program, would get $1,000. And one lady ended up contacting the company sent her $1,000. So sometimes it pays to read them. 99.99998% of the time, it's just going to be standard boilerplate. Um, but companies will sometimes sneak stuff in there, such as if you use this product, then you're never allowed to use this product on any other computer type of thing, or you can only use this program on one computer at a time. Some of it is perfectly fine. Some of it is rather draconian in nature and isn't enforceable, but companies still try to push it through there. But anyway, in the end user license agreements, there's usually a clause in there stating that you are not allowed to reverse engineer or break whatever they have. Say you bought a game which has some sort of copyright protection on there, and you didn't want that copyright protection. Technically, under the copyright law, you could reverse engineer that, break the copyright protection and play the game without the copyright protection. But according to the end user license agreement, the company would be within their rights to revoke your license to it so you can no longer play that game online type of thing. So fair use, music sampling kind of falls under the parodies section where you can take certain snippets of songs and use them in works that you create. Um, there's usually a restriction to where it can be no longer than, say, 30 seconds of a song. Um, don't quote me exactly on that if you get sued, because, well, this is not legal advice. This is just the world according to Jeremy advice. But um, if you were to take a song and take, say, 30 seconds of that and use that, you would fall under fair use. Now, some companies out there may think that that is not right and decide to sue you for it, which brings up the point that you may be perfectly legal. Um, you may take the 30 seconds, put it somewhere, use it, falls under all the laws, and be perfectly fine. The company doesn't care. And the thing that the company has going for them is they have a lot more money and lawyers, which get paid a lot more than any lawyer you could probably hire. So they will pay their lawyers obscene amounts of money to sue you and take any profits you make from that just because they don't agree with it. Now, on the off chance that you happen to win the case or you have enough money to be able to fight it long enough to where the judge does agree with you, sure, you might get your lawyer fees back. But in the case of, say, Oracle versus Google, that could take 10 years and millions and millions and millions of dollars to lawyers who are the only ones who are really getting paid this entire time. Um, libraries also fall under fair use. So a library, much like educational, can take books, they can scan books, and they can distribute book contents. Um, there was actually with this whole coronavirus, um, there's the Internet Archives, which we'll actually see a little bit of that. But basically, their mission is to archive the internet and historical views of websites all across the world. But anyway, they've also been scanning in and digitizing books and letting people basically check out a book as if they were at a library. Um, and they have been operating under the assumption that they are a library. You check or you can check out one book, and once you're done, you return that digital license for the book, and then you can check out a new book. Libraries are much the same. There's some legal questions as to whether or not they can actually digitize an entire book and then distribute it, but it doesn't seem like any company is really willing to fight that yet. But that could be a lawsuit at some point in the future. So, Copyright Term Extension Act. So if you remember back from the previous image where it listed all copyright terms, the last major update was 1976. Well, after that, the copyright was extended, and this was 1998. It was extended to life plus 70 years, and for the work of corporate authorship to 120 years after creation or 95 years after publication, um, which was also known as the Mickey Mouse Protection Act. So before this, um, the copyright for the infamous Mickey Mouse was set to expire in 19. It was either 1999 or 2000 or 2001, somewhere around there. Um, so the Disney and a bunch of other companies didn't like that because they wanted to own the copyright to Mickey Mouse so somebody else could not use it. So they lobbied Congress and Sonny Bono, he was part of the Sonny and Cher back in the 70s. He was a congressman. And so he wrote up a law, and unfortunately he passed away before it got passed, but they ended up passing the law and used his name in honor of it. Um, where works created in 1923 wouldn't enter public domain until 2019 or later. Mickey Mouse was created a couple of years after that, and so Mickey Mouse will be in public domain in 2024 unless the law gets or the copyright law gets extended again. Which, since they've already shown that they are willing to extend copyright laws for certain things, it's not a surprise that they may try to extend it yet again. This law was lobbied by the Walt Disney Company, which, surprise, surprise, Time Warner, Universal, Viacom, and professional sports leagues, among others. So, what do all those companies have in common? Well, they all own a lot of copyrighted work and media, which, if it gets into public domain, suddenly old movies and old created characters would suddenly become public, and anybody could do whatever they want with it. Think Bugs Bunny or um, Elmer Fudge or any of the old Looney Tunes. Those now you can suddenly do whatever you want with, much like the Mickey Mouse caricature. Now, there's been debate as to whether or not Walt Disney Company will actually lobby to extend the copyright even further, because 2024, that's only 4 years away. Um, and I think the prevailing notion is that Walt Disney Company is not going to um, try to get this extended any further. And the reason why is because of let's see, oops, because of what is actually protected. I think, yeah, what is actually protected. So if we look, oops, I wanted to open up this. We look here, and we do a search for Mickey Mouse, and we do an image search. Here we have a picture of, well, Mickey. But, okay, apparently then I'll open up the Wikipedia. Okay, I just want the image. There we go. Here is a picture of Mickey Mouse. Now, this falls under copyright. In 2024, this will still fall under copyright. But you may be asking yourself, or maybe you're asking out loud, maybe you're asking your head. I mean, I ask myself things out loud since, well, I'm talking to myself and the cat's next to me asleep, so she doesn't care. But I just said that the copyright expires in 2024. Why am I now saying that this will still fall under copyright past that? Well, the copyright, which will expire in 2024, is for a specific copyright. So let's see. Uh, Steamboat Willie, that's what it was. So if we look here, this particular image, Steamboat Willie, this is one of the original Mickey Mouse images. Um, okay, apparently. All right. Now, notice a couple of things about this image here compared to this image here. Well, for one, the shoes are big and yellow. The shoes here are white and, well, not as big. Um, the face is different as well. He doesn't have the gloves on his hand. There's a bunch of other things. This is the modern incarnation of Mickey Mouse. This is still protected because this is a new creation of Mickey Mouse. It has a new copyright applied to it. The Steamboat Willie version, this version will be in public domain in 2024. Walt Disney probably doesn't care as much about this particular copyright as they do about this particular copyright, which is why they may not be that concerned about fighting it. And also because the world is much more aware of these situations, it may cause a uh, negative publicity to affect the Walt Disney Company, and they really don't want that because, well, they are the quote unquote happiest place on earth. So they want to protect the current incarnation of Mickey Mouse, which that probably won't expire until, well, long after I'm dead. Let's see. So start from current slide. So that is why there's discussions as to whether or not the Walt Disney Company will actually lobby to try to get that extended. Same with Time Warner, Universal, Viacom, and the rest of the media companies. The companies opposed to the Copyright Term Extension Act, those were generally, I think it was the ACLU, the Americans for Civil Liberties Union. Um, there were a bunch of companies which were basically more for the individual person and not for the corporations. They were typically the ones against the Copyright Term Extension Act. But the politicians, they decided that they wanted to extend the copyright, and so they voted on it, and it passed. One of the other provisions that was also added was called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA. And this is a really big thing, and some of you may have heard of it before. If not, well, hold on to your hats or any other headwear that you have on, because this is a thing. So the DMCA criminalizes production or distribution of technology, devices, or services to circumvent measures that control access to copyrighted works, or DRM. DRM stands for Digital Rights Management. So those of you who uh, may have grown up when DVDs first started to come into play, um, DVDs on the back would have a region. And so they might list region 2 or region 1. There's also videos when you hook up a DVD player to a TV, sometimes through an HDMI cable. Sometimes the image would not actually come through. It might have a HDCP um, uh, error or something along those lines. Those are generally protected by DR Digital Rights Management, and it is a methodology for um, a creator, either a software or video or audio or something like that, to protect their work to only work on certain hardware with certain software or with certain versions of programs and stuff like that. The DMCA, or so reverse engineering software to remove that is legal under copyright law. But the DMCA criminalizes that now. So you can reverse engineer something, but you cannot reverse engineer something to remove any sort of digital rights management or protections from it being played on another device. It criminalizes circumventing access controls regardless of infringement. So if you buy a DVD and let's say your DVD won't play on your computer, but you just want to make a copy of it so you play it on your stuff, you legally bought the DVD, you legally own it, but you are not allowed to make a copy of that. That is completely verboten, illegal. So the DMCA it was lobbied by well, a lot of the larger corporations out there, which like the music industry, the RIAA, the movie industry, or the MPAA, the software industries, or the Business Software Alliance, and various companies out there to allow them to protect their material without it falling to copyright infringement. There is a provision in there that's known as a safe harbor provision, which protects ISPs or internet service providers and websites if the website and ISP do not know that they are infringing content or uh, providing the infringing content. Um, so Google has links to a lot of stuff across the internet. Likewise, YouTube. You can upload all sorts of videos to YouTube. If the Google or YouTube or any other website doesn't know that, say, somebody uploads the latest video for what's the latest movie that came out? I was watching Star Wars, so Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Um, let's say I decide to take that, upload it to YouTube. Well, I just broke copyright law, but it's on YouTube. With DMCA, um, if YouTube knows that it's up there and they do not take it down, then they are liable for that video being put on their service. But the safe harbor provision, as long as they don't know that it's up there, and they are not facilitating copyright infringement, then they cannot be held responsible. So copyright owners, what they have to do is they have to submit takedown notices to the website or the ISP, letting them know that this particular product is infringing and needs to be taken down. The website then has to take that uh, takedown notice and remove the content if it's actually infringing. Well, how big is YouTube? Well, the answer is really, really big. There's a lot of videos up there. It's impossible for any one person to watch every single video on YouTube. And they're constantly getting new videos uploaded all the time. And it's also impossible for YouTube to read through every single takedown notice and determine whether or not that particular video was infringing or not infringing. So what they do is they once they get a takedown notice, they remove the video right away, or they demonetize it, or they hide it, or something like that. So they stay within the laws of the DMCA. And then the person who uploaded it, they can go back and say, oh, no, 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 this is actually legal. They basically file a counterclaim saying that this is a legal video and don't take it down. Well, then the copyright owner has to go back and say, nope, nope, that's actually illegal, and go back and forth. 9 times out of 10, the copyright owner will just send the takedown notice. The website will remove the content, and the person who uploaded it will either um, get kicked off the platform. In the case of YouTube, if you get too many takedown notices, then they actually remove your entire account, or they'll just basically be told, don't do that again. But there's this website called the Lumen Database. And so from here, we can do a search for Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. And this is a open source web page, which anytime a takedown notice goes to Google, Google submits it to this Lumen database as well. And they've actually changed it so yeah, so there's still a way to get it, but they changed it so it's not as easy to get the information anymore. But if you do a search for something and then you click on one of the takedown notices, notice that it lists websites here, and we cannot actually see them without. I think you have to create an account and then yeah, click here to request access to see full URLs. Um, they don't actually prevent anybody from finding it, but they used to list the individual link here to where you could still find it. But Google is doing this, and they're kind of this Lumen database is just to track which companies are actually filing takedown notices. Now, what's to prevent what's to prevent some company from say, submitting a whole bunch of takedown notices to a website for content they don't actually own, but they don't want up there? Well, the law doesn't allow it. That's the only thing which is stopping that. Now, the law basically states that if you file a takedown notice and you know that the takedown notice is not valid, you can get fined. In practice, that rarely ever happens. In fact, there was uh, let's say there was a video that was put up on YouTube where this guy played Beethoven. I think it was Beethoven or Bach, one of those. He was playing it on the piano, uploaded it to YouTube. Now, if we think back a little bit, Bach, he's long since been dead. He created a whole bunch of works back in the 1700s, I believe. And so any copyright that he had expired long ago. So that's all under public domain. So the actual works of Bach are under the public domain. The guy created it himself. He played it on a piano, didn't use any sort of software or anything to create it or have somebody else create it for him. He actually played it on a piano and uploaded it to YouTube. So he owns the copyright to that created content. Well, Sony, on the other hand, felt that they owned the copyright to that content and filed a takedown notice and got the video successfully taken down because Sony happens to own the copyright to a specific performance of some piece of Bach's, which was played by some orchestra somewhere. But they own the copyright to that, and so they claim that because they own that copyright, they also own any public performance of the works of Bach. Well, I believe that the happy ending of it is the guy ended up getting the video put back up onto YouTube, and Sony basically issued an apology saying, "Oh, that wasn't supposed to get taken down." But when you're a person streaming on YouTube or you're uploading stuff to YouTube and you're using that as a source of income, where the longer that a video is not getting ad revenue, the more money you're not making. Well, that's particularly damaging to an individual. So companies, they can file these, but 9 times out of 10, if it's brought to their attention that, hey, you don't actually own the copyright to this, or you can't enforce this, this falls into fair use, they'll just go, whatever, and move on to the next thing. There's really no major enforcement penalty, unfortunately. So that gets us on to digital rights management. So I had mentioned before, DRM was one of the things that you cannot reverse engineer with the DMCA. So DRM is an access control used to restrict the use of hardware or copyrighted works. Um, and due to the DMCA, it is technically illegal to circumvent DRM. Computer games and other softwares use DRM to limit the number of systems you can install them on, or install or use the program on. So copies of Windows, Microsoft Windows, if you were to take the copy of Windows, install it on another computer, technically that's violating the copyright because you're only allowed one license, and the DRM may prevent you from actually installing that. Or other video games, if you want to install it on more than one computer or use it more once. Uh, Films, at least in the past, they used something called Content Scrambling System, or CSS, which was used for DVDs to encrypt the content of a DVD. So if you think back to when I was talking about encryption and like HTTPS, encryption is basically um, talking in a different language that only you and one other person can understand. And so what they would do is they would take a video that everybody can understand the video, and then they would encrypt it and make it a completely different language, and then put it onto a DVD. Then in order to play it back, you had to have specific software or you had to have specific hardware to be able to understand the language on that DVD. Well, the language was unknown for a while, except to the companies which made the software and hardware, until a guy by the name of Jon Lech Johansen, I think he's Norwegian, but he also went by the moniker DVD John. He created this software program out there, which would, I think it was called DVD CSS, which would basically reverse engineer the encryption to protect DVDs and allow you to actually make a copy of a DVD, which the movie industry was not happy with because suddenly all these DVDs out there, which were protected by this language, and once it's on a DVD, you can't just change the password or change the language there. It's on the DVD. And he figured out the language for there, and suddenly all these DVDs out there, well, now they were free for the taking and people could make copies of it. Um, and they tried to get the software removed from the internet, and as the internet does best, the software is still up there. Um, but the movie industry, they've adapted, and so they would change the language slightly. So then DVD John would have to figure out the new language and then write the software for that. So it's kind of like an arms race. The people would create a new method for protecting something, and then the people who were trying to break it would find out that method, and then they would release it, and then it would just keep accelerating. Um, some of you may remember HD DVD. Um, Back in the day, but so there was DVDs, and then the industries were trying to figure out new versions of high definition content because DVDs were rather small. You could fit a lot of content on there, but as things became higher and higher definition, it needed to take more and more space. So they started to develop new methods to distribute content. And so there are two competing products out there for a while. And I briefly mentioned this in class. There was HD DVD and there was Blu-ray. And as we all are aware now, Blu-ray ended up winning. I feel that HD DVD should have won, but Blu-ray won because, well, Microsoft kind of shot themselves in the foot and didn't actually include it with the Xbox, whereas Sony did include the Blu-ray with the PS3. But anyway, um, but HD DVDs were protected by something known as Advanced Access Content System, or AACS. Um, and it was a really complex code that was used to protect the high definition content. Well, somebody figured out that code, and this mix of numbers and letters down here is that exact code. They put it online. Boy, were the movie studios furious because now suddenly all these high definition videos were ripe for the taking because it was impossible to change from that because the same problem that they had with DVDs where they had a certain language encoded on the DVDs, well, that's the same thing with only with high definition stuff which people would really, really want to make copies of. So they started to send DMCA takedown notices to websites which had this offending key, 09F9110290, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Because they claimed that websites which were hosting that were violating DMCA and hosting copyrighted material. They copyrighted this key. So think about that for a minute. They decided arbitrarily that a certain sequence of letters and numbers should have a copyright, and that they are the only ones who are ever allowed to use that exact sequence of letters and numbers. Which, I mean, if you think about it, is kind of like me saying that I own the copyright to the number 42. Well, I own the copyright. Nobody else is allowed to use the number 42. I mean, obviously that's never going to fly, but let's just say, for instance, I do say that I own the copyright to the number 42. And if somebody else uses the number 42, I file a takedown notice and make them take it down from the website because, well, I know I own the copyright to it. That's effectively what they're doing here is they're saying that this exact string of letters and numbers is their copyright. Nobody else can ever use that exact string. And the internet, they again did what the internet does best and made sure that that number is out there forever, everywhere. There were shirts made out of it. There was images which they used it for colors. Um, those of you who do website design or anything like that may recognize these as hexadecimal digits. And if you break it up into sections of 3, so 09F911, and then 029074, et cetera, et cetera. Um, you do that, that can be a red, green, and blue color palette. And so you can actually create a color channel. And so somebody has done that. They took those um, zeros and ones and, well, all those letters and numbers and put it into color terms. Technically, that's illegal because they use that exact one. But the the media companies they were not happy with that. Um, they ended up changing the code, and HD DVD ended up falling by the wayside, and so now it's no longer much of an issue. But that is a interesting tidbit of history out there. Is this particular code there? If you look up illegal numbers, And let's see, we'll go ahead and look up illegal numbers. There's this Wikipedia. Oh, in fact, there is the HD DVD code in color form. Here's a PlayStation 3 edition of the free speech flag, which they had a similar thing. There's other illegal numbers out there. Some of them have valid reasons for being illegal because they're used for uh, not good purposes, notably ties to white supremacy or Nazism. Um, some of them, like due to the association with gangs in 2012, a school district in Colorado, our hometown, banned the wearing of jerseys that bore the numbers 18, 14, or 13, or the reverse, 81, 41, or 31. So they banned those numbers from the entire school district. What school district was that actually? That was Greeley. No, up in Greeley. Um, so there's a number of numbers which are illegal. These aren't generally enforced as much anymore just because it's very, very difficult to argue that a specific number should not be legal, but doesn't stop some companies from trying. So also in DRM, Sony, BMG, or something group. They introduced what's known as a rootkit, um, which is installed, or it's a program on a CD, which when the CD was put into a computer and somebody would open up the CD, it would install itself silently in the background without telling the users what it was installing. Um, it's a program, rootkits are programs that are installed in such a way that they're next to impossible to remove, utilizing commands in the operating system to effectively hide. So what Sony was doing is um, some engineer came up with this idea, and some executive probably said that this sounds like a really great idea. We need to do this to protect our intellectual copyright on music CDs. Is that whenever you would take the CD, put it into a computer, it would install the software. And the software would run silently in the background, hidden from view, to where you can't even uninstall it from add remove programs or any other method that way. Well, the software would sit there, and then whenever you would put the CD into a different computer, it would check and it would see that that software isn't on there and would refuse to play that CD. When you took that CD back to the main computer, then you could play the CD. And Sony was doing this to prevent people from buying a CD, copying the music off the CD, and then giving it to their friend, and then letting them copy it or selling it or something like that, because they really wanted to get more people to buy their CDs. Unfortunately, well, they didn't ask for permission to install the software. The software also utilized methods which are kind of illegal and also fell along the idea of viruses and malware, as in hiding from the user, trying to install themselves without the user's consent, utilizing operating system functions which are not available to the users, and being next to impossible to remove. And some of these, it was some of the rootkits were basically once you got it on your system, you had to literally wipe out your entire system and start over because there was no other way to get rid of it from the computer. So once somebody found out about this, um, a lot complained, and a lot of people got really, really, really upset at Sony. And Sony ended up having to recall every CD which had the rootkit on there, which totaled over 22 million CDs that were out in the world. And they ended up offering removal software to try to remove it. Yeah, okay. Um, Removal software. The problem is that some of the removal software didn't actually remove the software, and some of it just caused the problem to become worse. And Sony got a real big black eye from including that. And luckily, no other company has tried to do it lately. But if any company does, the public outcry would be rather massive. So, I'm not actually going to go through these right now, just because, well, you can go through them on your own. Um, Although actually, I'll go through this one. So, Ars Technica, I really like this website. I read it every day. It has a lot of news, but these are 5 examples of lame DMCA takedowns. Um, oh, I need to install an ad block. Um, Psychic versus Paranormal Unbelievers. There's a YouTube video out there where this a psychic is on TV and claims that he has psychic powers. And then there's a, a person who went on to the show and basically disproved him. Um, a 1993 PBS piece showing that Geller's tricks could be easily produced or reproduced. And so the paranormalist, Uri Geller, filed a DMCA takedown notice because he said that he owned the rights to it. So YouTube not only removed the video, also suspended the account of the person who uploaded it for 2 weeks before the counter notice was processed. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, they are an organization, a nonprofit organization, which works to ensure freedom on the internet and open access and stuff like that. They filed a counter lawsuit alleging that Geller, the magician, was not the copyright owner. Um, and actually, the owner was PBS. PBS wasn't the one that tried to take it down. He sued back, but eventually they settled the dispute, and I think it's still up there. Cowboys versus animal rights activists. You read through that. The NFL versus the law school professor. This one is actually rather interesting. There's a Brooklyn Law School professor who has a short 30-second snippet of the beginning of halftime of one of the Super Bowls. Now, the key part of it is she included the copyright notice on there as an example of what a copyright notice is. And then it happens to show the first little bit of the kickoff, which all it was a touchback, I believe. Well, the NFL filed a takedown notice saying that she's not to include that video. Basically, you're not allowed to include a video which lists our copyright notice saying that you're not allowed to include the video. Well, they lawsuit went around, and finally the video is restored once and for all, and you can actually view that video there if you want. Um, let's see, Warner Music versus Copyright Reform Advocate. Um, let's see. Oh, and then Music Label versus Dancing Baby. This was a very famous video back in the day where it was literally a baby dancing in the kitchen, and Prince's song "Let's Go Crazy" was in the background, but it was really hard to hear the actual song. Well, anyway, it got taken down because that song was playing in the background, even though it wasn't actually the focus of the video, and I think it was only 30 seconds. The video is now back up there because they won, and the person who uploaded it won a summary judgment in the case, and the video is back online. So I encourage you to read through all of these and actually look at some of the videos because some of it's rather humorous how they take it down. There's also examples of DMCA abuse. Those are this particular website is examples of other websites which would not abide to the DMCA safe harbor provision, and they would actually facilitate copyright infringement. I think Mega Upload is in there, and there's a bunch of other infamous websites. And then the Nintendo DMCA backed quest against online fan games. If you're a Nintendo fan, it's an interesting article to read and something which will probably cause your blood pressure to raise fairly significantly because Nintendo is really aggressive about protecting its copyright. So that one, in this case, it was a fan game. I think it was Metroid, where this person worked on it for, I think it was like 10 years. And it was community driven, and they would release it and everything, but it was largely, it would stay in the community. But it was 10 years, and finally they released basically like version 1.0 of their. It was a port of the original Metroid, I believe. And they released it, and 2 days later, Nintendo basically issued a takedown notice saying you can't put that up there, and everything has to go away. After 10 years of work, everything has to go away. And so that that's Nintendo's prerogative, but they had 10 years to do it, and they didn't. So well, I don't know. All right. I think I will stop today. It's already been an hour and 15 minutes. Thursday, I will go ahead and pick this up again, talking about SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, as well as patents and everything else. So um, I haven't seen any questions in the chat. It looks like I did lose one viewer, so I'm not. I'm down to three from the exciting number of four, which I think one of those is me also. So that might only be two. But anyway, um, I haven't seen any comments or anything. So if there are any comments, feel free to send me an email. And I will check it. And again, I did grade the tests, and I mentioned that in the email. If you want a copy of your test or you have questions about the test, feel free to let me know. I do check my email. Um, and homework is already up there for the entire week, along with this PowerPoint. And yeah, so if there's nothing else, then I will go ahead and end this. And thank you for staying for the entire time. And hopefully, I will see you all on Thursday. Thanks and good night.